think that life is deeply unfair? Does the future look dark? Have you lost your faith in humanity? What if reality isn't what you thought? What if there is a meaning and clear explanation to all the bad things in life? What if life has a big surprise in store for you? We all have many unanswered questions. Throughout the history of humankind, there have been many people who have tried to answer the big questions. Martinus Thompson became able to explain the mystery of life as no one else had done before him, following a transformative inner experience when he was 30 years old. After this experience, he could immediately see the answers to all the big existential questions about life, and he dedicated the rest of his life to describing this knowledge. His cosmology has been a great help to many people and explains why life is as it is. Take a look at this concentrated summary and ask yourself if it can be true. Martinus himself wanted people to be critical researchers, not blind believers in his world picture. Where to start? It's tricky because this worldview is so incredibly extensive and everything is connected. But I suppose the most fundamental thing is that there is another dimension alongside the physical one. The materialistic view of life that is so dominant these days is actually very limited. This is simply because the answers to the big questions lie outside physical matter. We will never find the answers just by weighing and measuring physical phenomena. To natural science, life will always be a mystery. But Martinus's texts and symbols clearly show that there is a dimension beyond the physical, a parallel dimension that can explain everything. Even though we can't see it, it's actually a dimension that we often refer to. For example, concepts such as consciousness, spirit, soul, thoughts, dreams, heaven, angels, etc. are all aspects of the same thing, the non-physical dimension. The thing is, the non-physical or spiritual dimension consists of ray-formed matter and electricity of such a high vibration that it simply cannot be measured using physical instruments. Martinez argues that consciousness and thoughts are electrical by nature and aren't really a part of the physical body. Our brains are in fact just antennae, or connecting links to our consciousness. This opens up the possibility that the consciousness can continue to experience and exist once the physical body dies. Since consciousness and life can exist without a physical organism, and not the other way round, it means that the spiritual dimension is the primary dimension. Think of it. It's a dimension that we still know almost nothing about. Martinez's logical analyses show that every living being has a consciousness. Every living being has in fact a three-part structure. Without this fundamental structure, life would never be able to exist. The law of conservation of energy that we know from science states that energy cannot disappear, it can only change from one form to another. According to Martinez, the same goes for consciousness. Consciousness cannot be destroyed or disappear, it can only change into different forms or states. Martinez shows that just like everything else in the universe, consciousness goes in cycles. This means that you always have experienced something, and you always will. Mind-blowing, isn't it? But there is more to it. Based on what we have set out so far, reincarnation no longer appears as an unlikely phenomena. Of course, from a physical point of view, it still is totally unlikely, but that's only because science does not have all the facts. Keep in mind that there are many indications that consciousness has capabilities that stretch beyond the physical dimension. For example, there are many accounts of near-death experiences, ghosts, clairvoyance, thought transference, remote viewing, etc. Accounts that can't just be dismissed. For every physical life that we live, we develop in different ways. First, we have to deal with a lot of physical resistance during a lifetime, but of course also many intellectual and emotional challenges. Personal experiences of suffering, accidents, and failure are also important knowledge. All experiences enrich our personality and are good for us in the long term. You could say that physical life is like a school, in which we step by step learn the laws of life. Sometimes we even do things that are fatal for us, but thanks to the principle of reincarnation, we will always be given new chances, new lives, so that we can repair the mistakes we made. Martinez emphasizes that evolution takes place gradually. We make no sudden leaps in evolution, whether mental or physical. All our abilities have begun as acts of will, trials, and failures. Behind each skill, there is a lot of practice, a lot of resistance that has been overcome. These talents and skills are stored in non-physical organs called talent kernels. This means that we can, in principle, take abilities with us from one life to the next. If we find it especially easy to learn something, this can be a sign that we have developed the ability in an earlier life. But talents can also lie dormant. We don't necessarily have to make use of all our talents in a certain incarnation. If a talent is too dominant, it might prevent us from developing other important talents. Perhaps you have a whole series of hidden talents that you aren't aware of. One important aspect of how our lives form and develop is the principle of hunger and satiation. Once we have achieved our dreams, we will sooner or later be satiated with the experience. Perhaps we will realize that the goal of our dreams wasn't so good after all. Maybe we weren't aware of the consequences. Either way, we will begin to long for new things, and our life will take a new direction. Martinus actually claimed that all dreams that we hold on to will eventually be realized, if not in this life, then in future lives. Reincarnation is like the cycle of day and night, but on a much larger scale. Just as we rest at night, we also rest and charge ourselves with energy between our incarnations. This is possible due to the fact that the spiritual dimension does not have the same resistance as the physical dimension. When we're in the spiritual world, everything that we can imagine instantly becomes real. It's like living in a world made of thoughts, so it's a far more pleasant and effortless state of being. So let's zoom out a bit and take a look at our cosmic voyage from an even larger perspective. You might ask yourself, where do we come from and where are we heading? Life on Earth has steadily evolved over millions of years, that we can be sure of. What most people haven't got the slightest idea of is that we have all made a personal journey through evolution. It can perhaps sound like pure fantasy, but according to Martinus's analyses, we have all developed through the plant and animal kingdoms, from primitive forms of life towards more complex ones. Physical life has gradually evolved our organisms, senses, and our different skills. And now we are here, at the edge of something completely different. Present-day human beings are between two zones of existence, the animal kingdom and the human kingdom. The great changes, crises, and conflicts that we see and experience today are in a way a consequence of the enormous transformation that we are undergoing from animal to human being. How? Well, a big part of the explanation is that the animal and the human kingdoms are dominated by two extremely different principles. The animal kingdom is ruled by the law of the jungle, the right of the strongest. This is something that we still see very much among humans. Human beings' intelligence, combined with their animal and selfish aspects, is a combination that creates a lot of suffering for others. As long as we are driven by egoistic forces, we will always cheat and exploit others to some degree. But as we shall see, there is a meaning in all the suffering this causes. The human kingdom, on the other hand, is filled with altruism, friendliness, intellectuality, and a culture based on helping and giving. Here, there are no conflicts, no lies, no jealousy. Technology and intelligence are no longer used to obtain advantages at the expense of others. In the human kingdom, everyone wants the best for each other. The evolutionary model that Martinus presents, the idea that we are on different evolutionary steps, makes a big difference to how we treat each other. Many of us believe that we can place more or less the same demands on everyone. We expect that people should know better, or sometimes we just can't understand why people are the way they are. But the fact that we're on different evolutionary steps and have taken individual paths means that we have very different backgrounds, different opinions, beliefs, abilities, even moral standards, intellect, reactions, sensitivity, etc. So, if we are the sum of our experiences, no one can in principle be different from how they are. Of course, we can try to force people, but is that wise? There is no point in placing unreasonable demands or punishing others for what they did. It's like blaming children for not being adults. We can't do anything about which evolutionary step we are on. To acknowledge these natural differences between humans can help us understand why we are sometimes so stupid, mean, or incapable. It makes it easier to forgive each other so that we can avoid becoming bitter. Sometimes we put people's bad behavior down to the fact that they had a bad day or maybe a tough childhood. But this approach goes much further than that. It gives us a much better understanding of human beings, but also a better understanding of what is going on in the world. As you may realize, we have to develop many aspects of our personality before we can become wise and well-balanced human beings. It's a process that requires hundreds or thousands of incarnations. All of us still have aspects that are more or less immature, or we simply lack certain abilities. We can't help this, and that is why it does no good for us to judge others, or ourselves for that matter. One of the most amazing things in Martina's cosmology is that absolutely all human beings, even the worst criminals, will one day become just as wise and complete as, for example, Jesus or Buddha. Even birds, insects, and other animals will eventually all gain so-called cosmic consciousness. Perhaps not in their current physical form, but still. We are all heading towards a state of wisdom and perfection. So what does cosmic consciousness mean? Cosmic consciousness will give us an ability to see the spiritual realities, the non-physical principles that rule the universe. It's like having access to a strong and clear intuition, an intuition that we can control with our will. This will quite simply give us a much better perspective on life and situations. How else can we know what is the most loving thing to do when we are faced with a difficult choice? Cosmic consciousness is a must if we are to become perfect, loving human beings. It's a must if we are to see what is right and what is wrong in a larger perspective. You might say that cosmic consciousness is our entry ticket to the human kingdom. But we cannot be part of the true human kingdom and gain this expanded ability before we are sufficiently humble and empathetic and less egoistic. But when we do reach that point, you could say that we have come back home after a long, long journey, back to a place of love. Then we will truly be able to experience that we are at one with everything. Martinez writes a lot about the mystery of sexuality and something he calls the transformation of the poles. We all have within us a feminine and a masculine pole, but they are not equally developed. If you're a woman, your primary pole is of course the feminine, but your masculine pole, which shows itself in your masculine characteristics, is under development. If you're a man, the primary pole is the masculine, and the feminine pole is the one that is developing. So what does that mean? Martinez explains that creativity and interests that lie outside marriage and the family are examples of how the opposite pole is developing. But we can even see signs of the transformation of the poles in all unhappy marriages and relationships. The goal of the transformation is that the poles should come into balance, which takes place when we gain cosmic consciousness. We will then be complete as human beings. Mentally, we will be just as much a man as a woman, and can make use of both the masculine and the feminine abilities. It also means that we will be able to direct our love to all and everyone, regardless of which sex they belong to, regardless of anything really. We will radiate love and friendliness. But we will also be able to be definite and set clear boundaries if needed. The most loving thing is not always the most pleasant. Imagine how it would be if everything in life went smoothly and there was absolutely no resistance. How long would that be any fun? One of the reasons that we're experiencing such difficulties nowadays is that we need to experience the opposite of harmony and happiness. Without contrast, our experience of life would be a very one-sided story. Even the most pleasant state you can think of will become a hell in the end. Will simply be too boring. Martinez calls this principle the principle of contrast. But the suffering that we undergo is also crucial for a couple of other reasons. Depending on where we are in evolution, how sensitive and developed we are, painful experiences increase our empathy and understanding of other people's difficulties. The wisest, most empathetic and morally developed human beings may actually be those who have suffered the most. If only we were able to see our various fates in the perspective of several lives, we would be able to see how incredibly beautifully and ingeniously our fates are intertwined. In a longer perspective, we will always desire to make up for our mistakes and imperfections. We will want to be a force for the good in those areas where we have suffered or caused others to suffer. For example, we often see people helping others in those areas where they have suffered themselves. At least it brings hope that something positive can come of our suffering. Once time has healed our wounds, once we have processed our painful experiences, most of us would not want to be without them. In the longer perspective, most people experience that the suffering caused them to grow as human beings. It's important to bear in mind the principle of reincarnation if we are to understand the meaning of suffering. And despite all the suffering, the keynote and foundation of the universe is love. In the cosmic perspective, we suffer only for a relatively short period in evolution. In such a perspective, everything is actually very good. And seen from this enormous perspective, we all have a very bright future ahead of us. Human beings are not meant to completely destroy the planet or wipe themselves out. There is a higher plan. Mankind's evolution is directed and overseen from the spiritual dimension. Martinez argues that behind every physical action, there is a hidden spiritual aspect. He says that all energies strive for balance and therefore form cycles. All movements are circular and return to their origin. This universal principle is known as the law of movement or the law of karma. All forms of energy that we send out, both actions and thoughts, form so-called fate waves. Martinez says that the returning fate waves don't necessarily come back in the exact same form as the original action. They can return in a way that corresponds to the original action. The energy can also come in a diluted or concentrated form. Furthermore, the repercussion from a certain action can come back after quite a short time, like almost instantly, or it can take longer. Things that afflict us can even have their origin in previous incarnations, which explains why many people seem to have such tragic fates for no apparent reason. The law of movement implies that there is no such thing as coincidence. The energies that we meet are always those that we ourselves have set in motion in one way or another. In other words, we all create our own fate, with every choice we make and every action. Well, this is not how we are used to thinking about the things that we encounter in life. To say that we create our own fate is a radical idea, and one that is worth discussing and examining. But we do have a habit of blaming what we encounter on others, on circumstances, on bad luck, etc. And in so doing, we make ourselves victims. You might ask yourself, how constructive is that? Understanding the law of karma, in fact, opens up a whole new way of seeing and dealing with different situations in life. It also means that we have a fantastic, fail-safe tool for forming our own future. If, for example, we feel that people have treated us badly, we can create a brighter future for ourselves by trying as much as possible to treat others well. It becomes clear that it's never constructive to lay blame on someone or something, since it is we ourselves that cause the problem in the first place. This doesn't mean that we should accept everything and be passive. What it means is that it is better to try to resolve our conflicts in a peaceful and intelligent way. Otherwise, we risk making things worse, and our suffering will just continue. If we are able to break a negative cycle of behavior and can forgive instead of retaliate, we will have made huge progress. With the principle of karma in mind, we need to reconsider a lot of things that are a natural part of today's society and way of living. Many people are simply unconscious of how much suffering they contribute to in various areas. For example, many of us don't think too much about the suffering we cause animals by eating meat. Martinez claims that eating meat reduces our protection against illnesses and accidents? What other areas are there in which our actions create suffering for others? As we all know, it can be very difficult to break a habit pattern or change a way of thinking. It takes time to build up new talents, so it's important not to blame yourself or give up when you do something stupid or when you don't succeed in living up to your ideals. Instead, give yourself credit for every small change you do accomplish. To see ourselves as beings involved in a huge transformation from animal to human can give us a much better understanding and greater empathy towards ourselves. It's actually possible to see everything in life as something positive, because from a cosmic perspective, it is. Through the hard school of life we learn, consciously or unconsciously, which actions create suffering. Someone who doesn't want to drink alcohol has perhaps been addicted to alcohol in a previous life and knows instinctively what suffering that can lead to. The law of movement shows that it actually really pays to be kind, and that it is always counterproductive to retaliate. Martinez offers us an enormous view of existence, and what follows now is perhaps the most mind-blowing part. As well as the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom, there are 3 more zones of existence. Together they form a gigantic cycle, the spiral cycle. Certain zones of existence in the spiral cycle are lived mainly in the spiritual dimension. There, we lack the resistance of the physical world, and life here is very pleasant. But when, after eons of time, we have become satiated with the higher realms, we will begin to long for new physical experiences again, and we will continue our voyage into a new cosmic spiral cycle. In the next spiral cycle, we will be planet beings. According to Martinez, planets are also living beings that communicate with each other telepathically. If we continue out into macrocosmos, we come across even more spiral cycles. The spiral cycle of the solar system, the spiral cycle of the galaxy, the spiral cycle of the cluster of galaxies, and so on. There is an endless number of spiral cycles ahead of us in evolution. This is quite hard to grasp, but it actually makes sense. Behind us in evolution, in microcosmos, we can also see various types of spiral cycles. The organs in our bodies, which are also living entities, belong to a certain spiral cycle. Cells belong to another one, and atoms and molecules, even further spiral cycles. Martinez claims that the universe is endless in all directions. There are no limits whatsoever. He actually claims that the entire endless physical universe consists of the physical organisms of living beings. They are all, at the same time, both macro beings and micro beings for each other. This is the so-called principle of life units. The entire universe is built on the principle of organisms within organisms. We could not exist in any other way than as a microbeing in a macrobeing's organism. This means that our physical organism is in itself a whole universe populated by living organisms. A universe that we can affect in either a positive or a negative way. If we, for example, eat unhealthy food, we also affect the beings who live in our bodies. These beings feel pain and unpleasantness just like we do. So by taking care of your body in a sensible way is not only beneficial to yourself and your future health, but also to the sentient micro-individuals in your body. Positive thoughts also favor our micro-beings to a high degree. According to Martinez, thoughts are the most powerful natural force in the body. Our thoughts can charge us with energy, just as much as they can drain us. For example, to have a good laugh is one of the best things that you can do for your microbeings. It is like sunshine and gentle breezes in microcosmos. The bottom line is that every living being that we see in the universe is an aspect of God. And what, in Martinez's view, is God? God is the all-dominating, all-wise, endless super-macro-organism. And we, the aspects of God, are like fairy tale characters writing a never-ending story together. A story that always ends well. Love is the keynote of the universe. As we have seen, this cosmology offers a completely new way of looking at our lives. And unlike most other worldviews, it's not just something we are supposed to believe in. Here, Martinez gives us logical analyses that we can follow with our own thinking. Analyses that explain all aspects of life. Martinez cosmology actually provides the foundation for a whole new science, a science based on the non-physical realities. A science that can guide us and comfort us through all kinds of difficult situations. It's a science that explains what leads to unhappiness and what leads to happiness, something there is a great deal of confusion about these days. Martinez's texts and symbols show us how ingeniously the universe is constructed. They reveal that there's actually logic and love behind everything. This knowledge puts the world and your life in a completely new light.